The black mail-order bride never came, so the cowboy tracked the wagon wreckage and found her barely breathing beneath the twisted metal and splintered wood, her dark skin pale against the snow. The mountain town had whispered she'd never survive. Too delicate, too different, destined to perish in the unforgiving wilderness like so many before her. But the weathered rancher saw something else in her fevered eyes as he carried her to safety, a fierce intelligence that matched his own desperate need for family. His young daughter waited at home, motherless and aching for the woman whose letters had promised them hope. Yet hidden in the bride's torn belongings lay secrets that could either forge an unbreakable bond or destroy everything they dared to dream. Would her past become their salvation or their ruin? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The wind cut through Lone Hollow like a blade, carrying whispers and doubt through every crack in the wooden buildings. Will Ryder stood at the depot platform for the third morning in a row, his weathered hands clutching a worn letter. His 8-year-old daughter Ellie pressed close to his side, her small breath forming clouds in the bitter air. "She'll come today, Papa?" Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. Will squeezed her shoulder. The other townspeople gathered near the depot cast sideways glances their way. Their eyes held that particular mixture of pity and judgment reserved for desperate men who made foolish choices. Mrs. Henderson from the general store shook her head as she passed. "Ordering a wife like you'd order cattle. What kind of woman answers such nonsense?" "The kind that don't exist," muttered Tom Bradley, the blacksmith. "Mark my words, Ryder, you've been played for a fool." Will's jaw tightened. 6 months of correspondence with Harriet Bell had given him something he hadn't felt since his wife died 3 years ago. Hope. Her letters spoke of books she'd read, remedies for childhood ailments, and dreams of a simple life filled with purpose. She wrote about wanting to teach children and tend a garden. She asked thoughtful questions about Ellie's favorite stories and Will's plans for expanding the ranch. The train's whistle echoed across the frozen landscape, growing louder as black smoke appeared against the gray sky. Ellie bounced on her toes. "That's her train, Papa." But as the passengers stepped onto the platform, Will's chest grew heavy. Traveling salesmen, a few miners, an elderly couple. No young woman with kind eyes and careful handwriting. Station Master Jake Morrison approached with a telegram clutched in his gloved hand. His expression told Will everything before he spoke. "Will, I'm sorry. This came through from Denver." Will took the yellow paper with trembling fingers. The words blurred together, then came into sharp focus. Wagon crash. Devil's Canyon. Severe blizzard. No survivors reported. "Papa?" Ellie tugged at his coat. "Where is she?" The townspeople gathered closer, their faces a mixture of false sympathy and satisfied smugness. Mayor Lucas Grange stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd never been wrong about anything. "Will, you did what you could. Time to face reality and move on." "She could still be alive," Will said, his voice rough. "In that canyon, in this weather?" Grange shook his head. "Son, that's wishful thinking talking." Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher, placed a gentle hand on Ellie's head. "The child needs stability, not false hope." Will folded the telegram and tucked it into his coat pocket. Every face around him reflected the same conviction. Harriet Bell was dead. His dream of giving Ellie a mother was over. He should accept his fate as a widower struggling to raise a daughter alone. But something burned in his chest, hot and defiant. Harriet's last letter had described her childhood on a farm in Kansas, how her father taught her to track wounded animals through thick brush. She'd written about surviving a tornado that destroyed their barn. Her words carried strength, not fragility. "I'm going after her," Will announced. The crowd erupted in protests. Grange stepped closer, his face stern. "Will, be reasonable. Devil's Canyon is 3 days' hard ride through mountain passes. The weather's only getting worse. She could be hurt, waiting for help. She's dead," Tom Bradley said bluntly. "And if you go chasing ghosts, you'll leave that little girl an orphan." Will looked down at Ellie. Her blue eyes, so much like her mother's, stared up at him with absolute faith. Sarah had made him promise, in her final moments, to never stop fighting for their family's happiness. "Mrs. Patterson," Will said quietly, "will you watch Ellie?" The schoolteacher nodded, though worry creased her features. Will knelt before his daughter. "I have to try, sweetheart." "I know, Papa. Mama would want you to." The simplicity of her trust nearly broke him. Will pressed a kiss to her forehead, then stood to face the disapproving crowd. "That woman wrote to us for 6 months," he said. "She cared about Ellie's nightmares and asked about her favorite songs. She remembered every detail I shared about the ranch. People don't invest that much heart in lies." "People invest heart in all sorts of foolish things," Grange replied. "Don't make your daughter pay for your stubbornness." Will mounted his horse, checking his supplies one final time. Rope, blankets, medical kit, enough food for a week. The wind whipped snow across the depot platform, and the temperature continued dropping. "If I'm not back in 7 days, send someone after me," he called to Grange. "Will!" the mayor shouted, but the cowboy was already riding toward the mountain trail. Behind him, Lone Hollow buzzed with gossip and predictions of tragedy. Ahead lay Devil's Canyon, where the wagon had crashed and where Harriet Bell might be fighting for her life. Will urged his horse forward into the growing storm, driven by something stronger than logic or fear. 3 days of treacherous riding stretched before him. The odds of finding anyone alive were slim to none. But somewhere in that frozen wilderness lay the woman whose letters had brought light back into his daughter's eyes. Will Ryder had made his choice. The mountain trail disappeared beneath fresh snow as Will pushed deeper into Devil's Canyon. His horse struggled against the steep incline, breath forming thick clouds in the freezing air. Ice coated the animal's whiskers and Will's beard, making every breath burn his lungs. On the second day, he found the wreckage, splintered wood and twisted metal scattered across a frozen creek bed like broken bones. The wagon had tumbled down a rocky slope, smashing against boulders before coming to rest in pieces. Will dismounted and searched through the debris, looking for signs of life. Torn fabric clung to jagged wood. A woman's boot lay half buried in snow. Will's chest tightened as he examined the scene, trying to read the story written in disturbed earth and scattered belongings. Smoke rose from a distant ridge. Will mounted his horse and rode toward it, hope flickering like a candle flame in a storm. The mining camp consisted of 3 rough shelters and a handful of men warming themselves around a fire. They looked up as Will approached, their faces gaunt from hard living and harsh weather. "You come from the wagon crash?" asked a bearded man with bandaged hands. Will nodded. "Looking for survivors." "Few of us made it," the man said. "Name's Cooper. Lost 2 fingers to frostbite, but I'm breathing." Another survivor, a young man with a splinted arm, stepped forward. "There was a woman, dark skin, real pretty. She helped patch us up after the crash." Will's pulse quickened. "Where is she now?" "Walked off into the storm," Cooper said, shaking his head. "Tried to stop her, but she was determined. Said she'd find help and come back for us." "Which direction?" The young man pointed northeast, toward the most treacherous part of the canyon. "Told her she was heading wrong way, but she wouldn't listen. That was 2 days ago." Cooper spat into the fire, making it hiss. "Smart woman, but book learning don't help much against nature. She's likely frozen solid by now." Will studied the terrain the survivors indicated. Dense forest led to steep cliffs and hidden ravines. Easy to get lost, easier to die. "She knew medicine," the young man added. "Fixed my arm proper, stopped Cooper's bleeding. Never seen anyone work so calm under pressure." "Where'd she learn that?" Will asked. "Said she nursed a doctor through his final illness. Picked up everything he taught her." Will mounted his horse again, following the direction they'd indicated. The survivors watched him go with expressions that mixed respect and pity. The trail Harriet had taken led through increasingly dangerous ground. Will found scraps of blue fabric caught on thorns, confirming he was following the right path. A piece of torn petticoat tied to a branch. Footprints in sheltered snow, growing fainter as the wind erased them. Hours passed. The storm intensified, turning day into premature twilight. Will's horse stumbled on hidden ice, nearly throwing him from the saddle. They pressed on, following a game trail that wound between massive pine trees. Then he saw her, a dark shape huddled beneath a fallen log, barely visible against the snow and shadows. Will dismounted and approached carefully, his heart hammering against his ribs. Harriet Bell lay unconscious, her lips blue with cold, her breathing so shallow it barely moved her chest. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair and eyelashes. She'd wrapped herself in what remained of her coat, but the thin fabric offered little protection against the mountain's fury. Will knelt beside her, checking for injuries. No broken bones, but her skin felt like marble. Hypothermia had taken hold, stealing her body's warmth and pushing her toward death's door. He gathered her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. Even unconscious and near frozen, her face held an intelligent beauty that matched the thoughtful words in her letters. This was the woman who'd asked about Ellie's favorite bedtime stories and remembered every detail about their ranch. Will's horse whickered nervously as wind howled through the trees. They needed shelter immediately. A quarter-mile through the forest, Will spotted an abandoned trapper's cabin. The roof sagged and gaps showed between the logs, but it offered protection from the wind. He kicked open the door and carried Harriet inside. The cabin held basic supplies, moth-eaten blankets, a stone fireplace, a few rusted pots. Will worked quickly, building a fire from dry wood stacked against one wall. Flames caught and spread, casting dancing light across the small space. He wrapped Harriet in every blanket he could find, then added his own coat over the pile. Her breathing remained dangerously shallow, her skin still cold to the touch. From her scattered belongings, Will gathered items that had spilled when she fell. A small Bible, a bundle of letters tied with ribbon, a leather portfolio containing documents he couldn't read in the dim light. As he set the portfolio aside, legal papers scattered across the floor. Even in the firelight, the words were clear enough to stop Will's heart. Mining claim deed, bank statements, legal documents bearing Harriet's name and astronomical figures. Will stared at the papers, his mind reeling. The woman he'd been corresponding with, the woman seeking a simple life as a mail-order bride, owned a silver mine worth more money than most people saw in a lifetime. She wasn't poor. She wasn't desperate. She was wealthy beyond imagination, which meant she was running from something far more dangerous than poverty. Will carefully folded the legal documents and placed them back in Harriet's portfolio. Whatever secrets she carried, they could wait. Right now, she needed to survive the night. He fed the fire steadily, keeping the flames high enough to warm the small cabin. Every hour he checked her pulse and breathing. Her skin gradually warmed under the layers of blankets, but she remained unconscious. Near dawn, Harriet's eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze darted around the unfamiliar cabin before settling on Will's face. Fear replaced confusion as she struggled to sit up. "Easy," Will said softly. "You're safe." "My things," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Where are my belongings?" Will gestured to the pile of items beside the fireplace. Harriet's eyes immediately found the leather portfolio. Her face went pale. "You looked through my papers." "Some scattered when I moved you. I couldn't help but see." Harriet closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging with defeat. "Then you know I'm not who I claim to be. You're Harriet Bell. You wrote me letters for 6 months. That's who you are to me." She shook her head. "I'm a woman with more money than sense, running from people who want me dead." Will added another log to the fire. "Tell me what happened." Harriet pulled the blankets tighter around herself. Her hands trembled, though whether from cold or fear, Will couldn't tell. "Dr. Marcus Whitmore hired me as his housekeeper in Denver," she began. "He was dying slowly, consumption eating away his lungs, had no family, no friends, just books and medical knowledge he wanted to share before the end." She paused, gathering strength to continue. "He taught me everything. How to stitch wounds, set bones, mix medicines. Said I had natural talent for healing. During his final months, I was more nurse than housekeeper." "What about the mine?" "He inherited it from a patient who couldn't pay his bills. Never visited the place, never cared about the silver. When he died, he left everything to me. Said I'd earned it through kindness. Will studied her face in the firelight. Truth lived in her eyes, along with pain. But his brother's family contested the will, Harriet continued, called it fraud, said a woman like me couldn't possibly deserve such an inheritance. They hired lawyers, made threats, said they'd see me hanged before they'd let me keep what wasn't rightfully mine. So you ran. I answered your advertisement, seeking a quiet life away from greed and violence. Your letter spoke of simple happiness, a child who needed mothering, a man who valued character over status. Will felt something shift in his chest. The woman before him had chosen his humble offer over wealth and comfort. She'd sought refuge in his family's love. I don't care about your money, he said simply. Harriet's eyes searched his face. Most men would. I'm not most men. Over the next 2 days, they remained trapped in the cabin while the storm raged. Outside, Harriet's medical knowledge proved invaluable when Will developed frostbite on his left hand from the rescue. She cleaned the damaged skin with practiced efficiency, her touch gentle, but confident. Hold still, she murmured, wrapping his hand in clean bandages. Dr. Whitmore always said frostbite was trickier than it looked. Tissue damage goes deeper than most people realize. Will watched her work, impressed by her skill and calm demeanor. You could set up practice anywhere with training like that. Women doctors aren't exactly welcomed with open arms, Harriet replied, especially women who look like me. She finished the bandaging and sat back on her heels. Will flexed his fingers, surprised by how much better they felt. Thank you. You saved my life. Least I can do is return the favor. That evening, as wind howled around the cabin walls, they shared stories of their past. Will spoke of his wife Sarah, how she'd made him promise to keep fighting for happiness, even after she was gone. Harriet described her childhood in Kansas, learning to track animals with her father before he died in a mining accident. Papa taught me to read signs most people miss, she said. Broken twigs, disturbed earth, the way animals move when they're afraid. Said survival meant paying attention to details. Those skills kept you alive in the canyon. For a while. Would have died without you finding me. On the third morning, the storm finally broke. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the cabin walls, revealing clear skies and manageable snowfall. Will prepared his horse for the journey back to Lone Hollow. Ready to face my daughter? He asked as he helped Harriet mount behind him. I've been looking forward to meeting Ellie since your first letter. They rode through snow-covered forests and across frozen streams, making steady progress toward home. Will felt Harriet's arms around his waist, her presence solid and real after months of hoping. As they crested the final ridge before Lone Hollow, the town spread out below them like a picture from a storybook. Smoke rose from chimneys, children played in the streets, and life continued its steady rhythm. But Will knew their arrival would change everything. Questions would come, judgments would follow. The woman behind him carried secrets that could either forge their future or destroy everything they'd begun to build. The choice between love and safety lay just ahead, waiting in the valley below. The entire town of Lone Hollow gathered as Will and Harriet rode down Main Street. Faces pressed against windows. Children stopped their games to stare. Word spread like wildfire through the settlement. Will Ryder had found his mail-order bride alive. Mrs. Patterson rushed from the schoolhouse, Ellie close behind her. The little girl's face lit up with joy as she ran toward them. "Papa, you brought her home." Will dismounted and lifted Ellie into his arms. Harriet slid down from the horse, her legs unsteady after the long ride. Ellie studied her with curious blue eyes. "Are you really going to be my mama?" Harriet knelt to Ellie's level, her voice gentle. "I'd like that very much if you'll have me." Within hours, the story of the rescue spread through every household. How Will had tracked her through the canyon. How she'd survived 3 days in the wilderness. How they'd weathered the storm together in an abandoned cabin. The town's reaction split cleanly down the middle. Mrs. Patterson welcomed Harriet into her home, offering clean clothes and a warm meal. The school children gathered around, fascinated by stories of the wagon crash and mountain survival. Several families invited them for dinner, eager to meet the woman who'd captured Will Ryder's heart, but others whispered behind closed doors. "Something's not right about her," muttered Tom Bradley to his wife. "Woman that educated, that well-spoken. Why is she settling for a cowpuncher's life?" "Mark my words," added Mrs. Henderson from the general store. "She's hiding something. Women like that don't just appear in places like this." Mayor Grange remained diplomatically neutral, but his eyes held questions whenever he looked at Harriet. Despite the undercurrent of suspicion, Harriet threw herself into town life with genuine enthusiasm. She volunteered at the schoolhouse, teaching advanced reading to older children and helping Mrs. Patterson with lesson plans. Her knowledge impressed everyone, even the skeptics. When young Timothy Morrison fell from a tree and broke his arm, Harriet set the bone with professional skill. She stitched up Jake Thompson's hand after a blacksmithing accident, her work so precise it barely left a scar. Word of her medical abilities spread quickly. "Where'd you learn doctoring like that?" asked Mrs. Morrison as Harriet finished treating her son. "I assisted a physician in Denver for several years," Harriet replied carefully. He was generous with his knowledge. At the Ryder Ranch, life fell into natural rhythms. Harriet helped with morning chores, cooked meals that made Will's kitchen smell like a real home again, and spent evenings reading to Ellie by lamplight. The little girl soaked up attention like a flower receiving rain after drought. "She knows every story I've ever wanted to hear," Ellie told her father one night, "and she's teaching me to braid my hair proper." Will watched from the doorway as Harriet patiently worked with Ellie's tangled curls. The sight filled empty spaces in his chest he'd forgotten existed. 3 weeks after their return, Will formally proposed on the front porch as sunset painted the mountains gold. He offered a simple silver ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "I know this isn't the life you planned," he said, "but if you'll have us, we'll make it good." Harriet accepted without hesitation, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe. Wedding preparations began immediately. The town rallied around the event, with Mrs. Patterson organizing food and decorations. Even some skeptics got caught up in the excitement, contributing quilts and household items for the new family. But as the wedding date approached, strange visitors began appearing in neighboring towns. A well-dressed man asked questions at the hotel in Cedar Ridge, 20 miles south. He showed a photograph and offered money for information about a woman matching Harriet's description. The hotel clerk, loyal to Lone Hollow, claimed he'd never seen her. Another stranger visited the general store in Pine Creek, inquiring about recent arrivals. The shopkeeper sent him away with false directions, but word of his visit reached Lone Hollow within days. Harriet grew increasingly anxious as reports trickled in. She jumped at unexpected sounds and watched the horizon constantly, as if expecting riders to appear at any moment. Will noticed her fear, but didn't press for details. He trusted her to share what she could when she was ready. The wedding dress, borrowed from Mrs. Patterson's hope chest, hung in the schoolhouse awaiting the ceremony. Flowers were gathered and arranged. The minister from Cedar Ridge agreed to perform the service. Everything was ready for a perfect wedding. On the evening before the ceremony, Harriet couldn't sleep. She stood on the porch watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky, her heart torn between happiness and dread. Will found her there, wrapped in one of Sarah's old shawls. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. "No," she said immediately. "This is everything I've ever wanted. You and Ellie, this life, this place, it's perfect. But I'm afraid my past will destroy it all." Will took her hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers. "Whatever's coming, we'll face it together." Harriet leaned against his shoulder, drawing strength from his steady presence. Tomorrow she would become his wife and Ellie's mother. Tomorrow they would be a real family, if her pursuers didn't find her first. In the distance, a coyote howled at the moon. The sound carried across the valley like a warning. Dawn broke clear and bright on Will and Harriet's wedding day. The entire town bustled with preparation. Tables appeared in the churchyard. Flowers decorated every available surface. Children practiced songs while women arranged food and men set up chairs. Harriet spent the morning at Mrs. Patterson's house, getting ready with help from the town's ladies. The borrowed wedding dress fit perfectly. Her hair was styled with wildflowers from the mountain meadows. For a few precious hours, she felt like any other bride preparing for the happiest day of her life. Ellie fluttered around like an excited butterfly, her new dress spotless and her hair in careful ringlets. "You look beautiful," she told Harriet with breathless admiration. "Papa's going to cry when he sees you." "Happy tears, I hope," Harriet replied, adjusting Ellie's hair ribbon. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock. By 1:30, guests filled every seat in the small church. Will stood at the altar in his best suit, hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. The minister from Cedar Ridge opened his Bible and smiled at the gathered crowd. At exactly 2 o'clock, 3 riders appeared at the end of Main Street. They rode straight-backed and purposeful, their horses lathered with sweat from hard travel. The lead rider wore a badge that caught sunlight like a warning signal: Federal Marshals. Mayor Grange stepped out of the church as the riders approached. The celebration noise died to whispers, then complete silence. "We're looking for a woman named Harriet Bell," the lead marshal announced. His voice carried the authority of federal law. "We have reason to believe she's in this town." Will pushed through the crowd, his face pale but determined. "What do you want with her?" The marshal dismounted, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "She's wanted for murder in Denver, the killing of Dr. Marcus Whitmore." Gasps rippled through the gathered townspeople. Will felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "That's impossible," he said. "Dr. Whitmore died of consumption. She nursed him through his final illness. According to witnesses, she poisoned him to steal his inheritance," the marshal replied. "A silver mine worth considerable money." Mrs. Patterson appeared in the church doorway, her face stricken. Behind her, Harriet stood frozen in her wedding dress, bouquet trembling in her hands. The marshal's eyes fixed on her immediately. "Miss Bell, you're under arrest for the murder of Dr. Marcus Whitmore." "No!" Ellie's scream cut through the air like a blade. She ran to Harriet, wrapping her arms around the white dress. "She didn't hurt anybody. She helps people." Will stepped protectively in front of his bride. "There's been a mistake. Harriet Bell is an honorable woman." "Step aside, sir," the marshal ordered. "This is federal business." The second marshal produced iron shackles. The sound of metal clicking together echoed off the church walls like a death knell. Harriet gently disentangled Ellie's arms from around her waist. She kissed the child's forehead, her own tears falling freely. "Be brave, sweetheart," she whispered. "Take care of your father." "Don't take her," Ellie sobbed. "Please don't take my mama." But the marshals had their orders. They cuffed Harriet's wrists behind her back, the iron looking obscene against her white dress and flower decorations. "The witnesses who accused her," Will demanded. "Who are they?" "Dr. Whitmore's nephew and his wife," the marshal replied. "Respectable people with no reason to lie." Will's mind raced. The same family members Harriet had fled, the ones who'd contested the will. But how could he prove their deception without evidence? "She saved my son's life," Mrs. Morrison called from the crowd. "Fixed his broken arm better than any doctor. Stitched up my hand perfect," added Jake Thompson. "Woman with healing hands don't go around poisoning people." Other voices joined the protests. Character witnesses stepped forward. But federal law trumped local opinion. The marshals loaded Harriet onto a horse, her wedding dress bright white against the dark leather saddle. She looked back once at Will and Ellie, memorizing their faces. "I didn't kill him," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the churchyard. "He died peaceful in his sleep, holding my hand. I loved that old man like a father." Will believed her completely. Every instinct he possessed screamed that Harriet was innocent. But proof was another matter entirely. The marshal swung into his saddle. "She'll have a fair trial in Denver. Justice will sort out the truth." "Justice?" Will stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "You mean the kind of justice money can buy?" The marshal's expression hardened. Careful, mister. Don't make this worse for yourself. As the riders prepared to leave, town lawyer Edmund Hayes pushed through the crowd. The elderly man had handled legal matters in Lone Hollow for 30 years. Marshal, I request time to review the charges and evidence, Hayes called. This woman has rights. She'll get a lawyer in Denver, the marshal replied curtly. The horses began moving toward the edge of town. Ellie broke free from Mrs. Patterson's arms and chased after them, her small legs carrying her as fast as they could go. Mama, come back! We need you! Will caught his daughter before she could follow the riders out of town. He held her against his chest as she sobbed, his own heart breaking with every tear. The wedding guests stood in stunned silence, watching justice ride away in a cloud of dust. The woman who had brought love and healing to their community was gone, accused of the very thing her nature made impossible. Will paced the floor of lawyer Edmund Hayes's office like a caged wolf. 3 days had passed since the marshals took Harriet. 3 days of sleepless nights and Ellie's inconsolable tears. There has to be something wrong with their case, Will said for the 10th time. Harriet couldn't murder anyone. Hayes adjusted his spectacles and spread papers across his desk. I've been studying the charges. The timing bothers me most. What do you mean? Dr. Whitmore died 6 months ago. Why wait until now to bring murder charges? Why not arrest her immediately after his death? Will stopped pacing. Because they needed time to build a false case. Exactly what I'm thinking. Hayes had sent telegrams to Denver, requesting copies of the official charges and witness statements. What came back raised more questions than answers. Look at this, Hayes said, pointing to a document. The nephew, Charles Whitmore, claims he visited his uncle the day before he died. Says he witnessed Harriet giving the doctor suspicious medicine. So, Charles Whitmore was in St. Louis on business that entire week. I have hotel records proving it. Will's pulse quickened. He's lying. Gets better. His wife claims she saw Harriet stealing silver from the house after the funeral. But the funeral director confirms she left town the day Dr. Whitmore died. Never attended the service. The web of lies began unraveling with each new piece of evidence. Hayes worked tirelessly, sending telegrams and requesting records. The town rallied around the effort. Mrs. Morrison took collections to pay for legal fees. Even former skeptics contributed money and support. Ellie surprised everyone by organizing the town's children into what she called Mama's Army. They distributed flyers with Harriet's picture and the truth about her character. The sight of a heartbroken little girl fighting for her mother's freedom moved even the hardest hearts. My mama helps people, Ellie told anyone who would listen. She fixed Timothy's arm and made Mrs. Patterson's headaches go away. Murderers don't do things like that. Meanwhile, Will prepared for the most important journey of his life. Armed with Hayes's evidence and a heart full of determination, he saddled his horse for Denver. Bring her home, Papa, Ellie whispered as he prepared to leave. I will, sweetheart, I promise. The ride to Denver took 4 days through mountain passes and across high plains. Will pushed hard, changing horses at relay stations and sleeping only when exhaustion forced him to stop. Denver sprawled before him like a different world. Brick buildings, paved streets, electric lights, and more people than he'd seen in his entire life. The courthouse stood in the city center, its stone columns designed to intimidate anyone who dared challenge justice. Will found Harriet in a cell that reeked of despair and broken dreams. She looked smaller in the gray prison dress, her spirit dimmed but not broken. You shouldn't have come, she said through the iron bars. Nowhere else I'd rather be. Will, they have witnesses, money, influence. What chance do we have? He pulled out Hayes' documents. More than you think. The trial began the next morning in a courtroom packed with curious spectators. Judge Morrison, a man whose reputation suggested he could be bought for the right price, presided with obvious bias. The prosecutor painted Harriet as a scheming woman who seduced a dying man for his fortune. Charles Whitmore took the stand, his expensive suit and confident manner impressing the jury. He described watching Harriet administer poison to his beloved uncle, his voice breaking with manufactured emotion. She took advantage of a sick, lonely man, he testified. My uncle trusted her, and she murdered him for money. But when Will's hastily hired attorney cross-examined him, the lies crumbled. You claim you visited your uncle the day before he died. Where were you staying in Denver? The Palace Hotel. Strange, since hotel. Records show you were registered at the Lindell Hotel in St. Louis that entire week. Charles's face reddened. I must have misspoken. The attorney produced telegraph receipts, business records, and witness statements. Each document demolished another piece of the false testimony. The jury watched with growing interest as the prosecution's case collapsed. Charles's wife fared even worse. Her claim about witnessing theft after the funeral fell apart when the funeral director testified she'd never attended the service. I was there, she insisted desperately. Ma'am, I personally escorted every mourner. You were not present. The defense called character witnesses from Lone Hollow. Mrs. Morrison described how Harriet saved her son's life. Jake Thompson showed his perfectly healed hand. Mrs. Patterson testified about Harriet's gentle nature and dedication to children. Finally, Harriet took the stand. She spoke quietly but clearly about nursing Dr. Whitmore through his final months. How he taught her medicine because he saw her natural talent for healing. How he chose to leave her his inheritance because she'd shown him kindness when his own family ignored him. He died peacefully, she said, tears streaming down her face. His last words were thanking me for making his final months bearable. The prosecutor tried to break her testimony, but Harriet's honesty shone like sunlight through storm clouds. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Not guilty on all charges. Charles and his wife were arrested immediately for perjury and fraud. Their scheme had backfired spectacularly, and they faced prison time for their lies. Will swept Harriet into his arms as the courtroom erupted in celebration. Justice had prevailed, but more importantly, truth had won over corruption. 3 weeks later, Lone Hollow hosted its second attempt at Will and Harriet's wedding. This time, nothing interrupted the ceremony. Harriet walked down the aisle in a new white dress, her head high and her heart full. Ellie served as flower girl, beaming with joy as she watched her parents exchange vows. The silver mine provided resources to build a proper school and small hospital for the town. Harriet became the settlement's unofficial doctor, using her inherited wealth to help families who couldn't afford medical care. Years later, visitors to Lone Hollow would hear the story of the mail-order bride who survived a mountain crash, fought false accusations, and found perfect love in an imperfect world. Will and Harriet raised Ellie alongside 3 more children, their ranch prospering and their love growing stronger with each passing season. What began with letters and hope became a legacy of courage, justice, and the unshakable truth that real family is built not by blood, but by choice.